What happens when one of the most intense actors in Hollywood, a man known for disappearing into roles so completely that audiences forget they're watching a performance, sits down for a morning show interview, only to have his darkest chapter weaponized against him by a host who seems more interested in breaking him than understanding him? What you're about to witness is one of the most uncomfortable confrontations ever captured on American morning television. The moment when Tom Hardy, the British actor who brought Bane and Mad Max and Alfie Solomons to life, showed the world that the intensity on screen comes from something very real underneath. The studio went silent. The coffee cups stopped moving. And George Stephanopoulos discovered that some men don't perform vulnerability on command. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this confrontation will change everything you think you know about celebrity interviews. Times Square Studio had a different energy that Wednesday morning. Word had spread that Tom Hardy was the guest, and there was a palpable tension among the production staff. Hardy was known in media circles as a challenging interview. He gave short answers. He deflected personal questions with a skill that bordered on art. He had once shut down a reporter who asked about his sexuality with a single word that became legendary in journalism circles. Why? It was the kind of response that made publicists nervous and audiences love him even more. When Tom Hardy walked onto the set, the contrast with the bright, cheerful GMA aesthetic was immediate and striking. At 47 years old, he carried himself with the physical presence of a man who had transformed his body dozens of times for roles, who knew exactly what it was capable of and what it had cost him. There was something almost feral about him, even in this sterile television environment. The tattoos peeking out from his sleeves told stories the morning show audience would never fully understand. The way he held himself suggested a man who had learned to be ready for anything, a survival instinct that never fully switched off even in the safest of spaces. Hardy wasn't the type to wave and grin. He nodded once, acknowledging the welcome, and settled into the interview chair with the careful positioning of someone who had learned to be wary of cameras. Robin Roberts greeted him with genuine warmth, recognizing perhaps a fellow survivor of difficult circumstances. Michael Strawn himself, a man of physical presence, seemed to recognize something in Hardy and offered a respectful nod of acknowledgement. George Stephanopoulos watched from his anchor position with an expression that was difficult to read. He had his notes arranged in front of him with unusual precision, more preparation than he typically brought to celebrity segments. He had prepared extensively for this interview, though not in the way his colleagues might have expected. "Tom Hardy, welcome to Good Morning America," Robin began. "We're so excited to have you here to talk about your new film." "Thanks for having me," Tom replied, his voice carrying that distinctive London rasp. His answer was polite but minimal, offering nothing extra. Then George leaned forward and the atmosphere shifted. "Tom, I want to start with something real," George said, his voice carrying the serious tone he usually reserved for political interviews. "You've been very open over the years about your struggles with addiction, crack cocaine, alcohol, hitting rock bottom in your 20s. But I wonder if we can be honest about something. Do you think Hollywood has a tendency to romanticize these stories? To turn addiction into a narrative device that makes actors seem more interesting, more tortured, more authentic?" The question was clearly designed to put Tom on the defensive from the first moment. His expression didn't change, but there was a slight tension in his shoulders that suggested the shot had landed somewhere. "I'm not sure I understand the question," Tom said carefully. "Are you asking if I've exploited my addiction for career purposes?" "I'm asking if the industry rewards a certain kind of story," George pressed. "The troubled artist who found salvation, the man who went to hell and came back. It's a very marketable narrative, isn't it? And you've certainly benefited from telling it." The accusation was sharp and clearly calculated. Robin shifted uncomfortably. Michael's expression tightened. "I got sober because I was going to die," Tom said, his voice dropping to something quieter but more intense. "Not because I thought it would be good for my career. I was 25 years old, drinking and using every day, and I knew that if I didn't stop, I wouldn't see 30. That's not a narrative, that's just the truth." He shifted in his chair, his body language betraying the discomfort of revisiting these memories. "I remember the exact moment I knew I had to change. I was in my flat in London, alone, and I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. He was hollow, empty, already dead in every way that mattered, just waiting for his body to catch up. That's not marketing, George. That's the moment that saved my life. But you've talked about it extensively, George continued, seemingly unmoved by the raw honesty in interviews, in profiles, in acceptance speeches. At some point, doesn't the repetition of the story become its own kind of performance? Another role you're playing. Tom was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had an edge that made several crew members exchange nervous glances. You've clearly prepared for this interview with a specific goal in mind. I'm just not sure what you're hoping to accomplish. Do you want me to apologize for being an addict? Do you want me to apologize for getting sober? Do you want me to apologize for talking about it honestly in the hopes that it might help someone else? I want honesty, George said. Real honesty, not the polished version you've given 100 times before. You want honesty. Tom leaned forward, and there was something in his eyes that suggested George had made a serious miscalculation. Here's honest. I was a mess, a complete and total mess. I was unreliable, I was destructive. I hurt everyone who tried to love me. I lied constantly to myself and to everyone else. I stole from people. I manipulated people. I was by any reasonable measure a terrible human being. His voice was rising now, carrying an intensity that seemed to fill the studio. I got sober because a friend looked me in the eye and told me I was going to die alone and no one would care. And he was right. That's the honest truth. George, not romanticized, not marketable, just ugly and real. Is that what you wanted to hear? George seemed momentarily thrown by the raw directness, but he pressed on. But here's what I find interesting. You got sober, and then you became one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Bane, Mad Max, Venom, multi-million-dollar franchises. Some might say the addiction story became a convenient backstory for the intense method actor persona you've cultivated. Cultivated. Tom's laugh was short and carried no warmth. You think I cultivated this? You think I chose to be the way I am? I'm intense because I'm terrified. George, every day I'm terrified that I'm going to slip back into being the person I was. Every role I take, I throw myself into completely because if I don't, my mind starts going to dark places. That's not cultivation. That's survival. Robin tried to redirect. Tom, I think what people really admire about you is your commitment to your craft, the physical transformations, the accent work. No, Robin, let's stay with this, Tom interrupted, his eyes fixed on George. Because I think Mr. Stephanopoulos has more he wants to say. Don't you, George? You've been building towards something. Let's hear it. George straightened in his chair, accepting the challenge. Fine. Let's talk about the intensity, the method, acting, the reputation for being difficult on set. Some directors love working with you. Others say you're impossible. There are stories about conflicts, about you being controlling, about you needing to dominate every scene. Is that the addiction manifesting in a different form, trading one obsession for another? The question was brutal in its directness. It suggested that Tom's artistic process was actually a pathology, that his success was built on dysfunction. You want to psychoanalyze me now? Tom's voice was quiet but dangerous. Based on what? Tabloid stories, rumors from people who have their own agendas. You don't know me, George. You don't know what I'm like on set. You don't know what my process is or why it works. I know what people say. People say a lot of things that doesn't make them true. Tom stood up, and the movement commanded immediate attention. He wasn't tall by Hollywood standards, but there was something about his presence that made the space around him feel smaller. Let me tell you what I know, George. I know that I've worked with directors who have hired me multiple times because they trust me. I know that I've built relationships with actors and crew members who seek me out for projects. I know that I've never missed a day of work due to my personal issues since I got sober over 20 years ago. He began packing the physical energy that usually went into his performances, now channeling into his words. Do I push hard on set? Yes. Do I ask questions that some people find challenging? Yes. Do I sometimes disagree with directors about choices? Yes. That's called being engaged with your work. That's called caring about the outcome. If that makes me difficult, then I'll wear that label with pride. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I came up through drama school in London. I studied the craft. I learned that acting isn't about showing up and saying lines. It's about finding the truth of a character, even when that truth is uncomfortable, even when it makes people around you nervous, because the audience can tell the difference. They can feel when something is real and when it's fake. He pointed at George. That's why people connect with my performances, not because I'm playing a character. Because for those moments on screen, I am that character. I've lived in their skin, I've understood their pain. And yes, that process can be intense. It can be disorienting. It can be hard for people around me to understand. But the results speak for themselves. But the stories about conflicts George started. What stories? Tom cut him off. Be specific. Name a project where my behavior damaged the production. Name a director who said they'd never work with me again. Name one concrete example instead of hiding behind vague insinuations. George seemed caught off guard by the direct challenge. There have been reports, rumors, gossip. Tom's voice was thick with contempt. That's what you're basing this interview on. You're a serious journalist, or at least you used to be. You covered wars, you advised presidents. And now you're sitting here asking me to respond to anonymous gossip about whether I'm too intense on film sets. The observation about George's career shift from political journalism to morning show host seemed to strike something. His face re-ended. I'm asking legitimate questions about your reputation. No, you're not. You're trying to provoke a reaction. You want the intense Tom Hardy to come out on camera so you can have your viral moment. Well, here he is. George, is this what you wanted? He gestured around the studio. I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of, a film I spent 2 years of my life making. Instead, I've spent the last 10 minutes defending my sobriety, my process, and my character against accusations you can't even substantiate. That's not journalism. That's ambush. Robin stood up, trying to physically insert herself into the tension. I think we should take a breath and maybe talk about the film. I appreciate that, Robin, Tom said, his voice softening slightly when he addressed her. And I'm sorry this has gone the way it has, but I think I need to say something before we move on or before I leave. He turned to look directly at the camera, and his voice shifted to something more measured, but no less intense. There are people watching this right now who are struggling with addiction, who are in the worst moments of their lives, and wondering if it's even possible to come back. And they just watched a major television personality suggests that recovery stories are marketing strategies, that getting sober is just another career move. His voice cracks slightly with emotion. I need those people to know something. Recovery is real. Change is possible. I am living proof that you can be completely broken and put yourself back together. Not because it makes for a good story, because it's the only way to survive. And if my talking about my journey helps even one person believe that they can get through another day, then I'll keep talking about it no matter how many journalists try to make me feel ashamed of it. He turned back to George. You asked if my addiction story is a performance. Here's my answer. I have been sober for 22 years. In that time, I've built a career, a family, a life that I never thought I'd have. I've got a wife who loves me despite knowing everything I've done. I've got children who will never see the man I used to be, and I thank God for that every single day. I've watched friends die from the same disease that nearly killed me. I've attended more funerals than I can count. And every single day, I wake up grateful that I'm not in a grave or a jail cell, which is where I was headed. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. Do you know what it's like to wake up and not recognize yourself? To look at your hands and see a stranger's hands? To have done things so shameful that you can't even remember them clearly, but you know they happened because of the damage they left behind. That was my life, George. That was every day for years. And you want to tell me it's a marketing strategy? His eyes were bright with emotion now. That's not a performance, George. That's my life. And you can question my methods as an actor. You can question my personality. You can question anything you want. But you don't get to question whether my recovery is real. You don't have the right. George opened his mouth to respond. But Tom wasn't finished. You know what I find interesting about people like you? You've built careers on asking questions, on holding people accountable, on seeking truth. But you've never had to face the kind of truth I've faced. You've never had to look in a mirror and see a monster staring back. You've never had to rebuild yourself from nothing while the whole world watched. He gathered himself, straightening his posture. I've been asked about my addiction hundreds of times. Usually, I answer patiently because I understand that people are curious, and because I hope my story might help someone. But this is the first time someone has suggested that my suffering was strategic, that my recovery was calculated, and I find that genuinely offensive. He looked at Robin and Michael. I'm sorry. I came here hoping to have a real conversation about work I care about. Instead, I've had to defend my entire existence. That's not an interview. That's a character assassination. He began walking toward the edge of the set. Tom, wait, George called out, I didn't mean to imply. Yes, you did. Tom turned back one final time. You meant exactly what you said. You just didn't expect me to push back. Most celebrities smile and nod and pretend everything is fine because that's what we're supposed to do. But I'm not most celebrities, George. I'm a recovering addict from East London who clawed his way to where I am through sheer bloody mind and determination. I don't know how to be anything other than honest, even when it's uncomfortable. He paused at the edge of the set. To everyone watching who's fighting their own battles, whatever they are, don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of your struggle. Don't let anyone tell you that your recovery isn't real because it's inconvenient for their narrative. You know what you've been through. You know what it cost you, and you don't owe anyone an explanation. He nodded once to Robin and Michael, acknowledging their presence with genuine respect. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it ended this way, but I'm not sorry for anything I said. And I hope someone out there who needed to hear it actually heard it. And with that, Tom Hardy walked off the set of Good Morning America, leaving behind a silence that seemed to swallow the entire studio. Robin looked close to tears. Michael was shaking his head slowly, his expression one of barely contained frustration at what his colleague had done. And George Stephanopoulos sat in his anchor chair looking like a man who had just realized he had profoundly miscalculated the man he was dealing with. The show cut to commercial, but everyone in that studio knew that what had just happened couldn't be smoothed over with an advertisement break. A man who had clawed his way back from the edge of oblivion had been forced to defend that journey against someone who had never walked a similar path. And in defending himself, he had shown the world something that no film role had ever captured. The raw, unscripted reality of a survivor who refused to be ashamed of surviving. The aftermath of that interview would dominate news cycles for days. Clips of Tom's passionate defense of his recovery would be shared millions of times across every social media platform. Addiction counselors would use his words in sessions with struggling patients, and George Stephanopoulos would face a backlash that would force him to issue a public apology that many found insufficient. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the conversation it sparked about how we discuss addiction and recovery. Tom Hardy had refused to let his struggle be diminished or dismissed. He had shown that vulnerability and strength could coexist, and he had reminded everyone watching that some stories aren't told for marketing. They are told because staying silent would be a betrayal of everyone still fighting to survive. For those who had watched him transform into Bane and felt something primal awaken, who had seen Alfie Solomon's swagger through Peaky Blinders with dangerous charisma, who had recognized in his performances something that went beyond acting into something almost uncomfortably real. There was finally an explanation. The intensity wasn't manufactured. It came from a man who had stared into the abyss and somehow found the strength to turn away. And that morning on live television, he had shown that the same intensity could be used to defend something more important than any role, the truth of his own survival. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was George Stephanopoulos out of line, or was he just doing his job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.